Well, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30, so it is time for me to open these hearing sessions into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. For those of you who haven't attended previous sessions, just to introduce myself, my name is David Spencer and I'm the independent examining inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out this examination. This early stage, turn to the Council for the usual housekeeping matters, please.
Okay, good morning everybody. We're not expecting any fire alarms this morning, so if there is an alarm, please can you make your way to the nearest fire exit, which is just on the far side of this room, and then make your way to the far side of the hotel car park and wait instruction from hotel staff. The toilets are located just across the corridor outside of this room. Please note that there's cables taped to the floor, so please be careful when you're walking around the room not to trip on those. Also, the hotel operates a parking eye system in the car park, so if you do have a car parked, please make sure you enter your registration details at the devices at reception. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, can I check before we start this morning's session, is there anybody here from the local press, please? You've been here before from the Shields Gazette? Yep, thank you. Now, these sessions are being recorded and live streamed by the Council, so they will be made available on the Council's website for those who haven't been able to come to this room today. Does anybody else wish to make their own separate recording of this morning's session? No. In which case, these are meetings that are held in public, but it's only people who are seated around the table who will be able to speak and make contributions to this morning's discussion. Hopefully everybody's here for Matter 5, Issue 5, land at West Hall Farm in Cleadon, site GA4, in the proposed plan that's before me. In terms of how these sessions work, we'll be working to an agenda that I've previously published. That's based on my previously released Matters, Issues and Questions, which were published in early May. And my Matters, Issues and Questions reflect the various representations that were made on the plan that was published by the Council for representations back in January to March 2024. So all representations made on that plan are before me. All statements that were made in response to my Matters, Issues and Questions are also before me. For the purpose of these discussions, they should be taken as read, so it's not necessary for people to read out to me statements or what they've previously provided. What is important for me in these sessions is to understand from those who consider that the plan is not sound or not legally compliant why I should draw that conclusion, and were I to draw that conclusion, to understand what you would like to see by way of a change or modification to the plan in order to make it what's known as sound or legally compliant. I think from reading most representations from those who are seated to my left, I can probably summarise that the change that is being sought is for this site to be removed from the proposed plan, but we'll come into a bit more detail around that and why that should be the case. Obviously, the Council will be afforded their opportunity to explain to me why they consider that the plan should be considered sound. I'll try and bring people in on the discussion as we go along. Please try and keep points brief and to the point. If there's a particular matter that you want to come into and bring to my attention that you wish to come in, upend your nameplate, and that will signal to me that I can bring you in at that relevant point of the discussion. Are there any questions, just broadly, generally, on how these hearing sessions work? No. In which case, because these sessions are being recorded and it's helpful to me and to other people in the room, can I ask people to introduce themselves, please, using the microphones, and can I start with the Council's team for this session, please?
So, good morning. My name is Paul Shadarevian, KC, acting for the Council.
Hello, I'm Deborah Lamb. I'm the Operations Manager for the Spatial Planning Team at South Tyneside Council.
Rachel Cooper, Senior Plan and Policy Officer at the Council. Matt Clifford, also a Senior Planning Policy Officer at the Council.
Morning everyone, my name's Trevor Mail, I'm Strategic Transport Lead at South Tyneside Council.
Lucy Routledge, Historic Environment Officer at South Tyneside Council.
Unlike my name tag, I'm not Miss Longstaff, I'm Mr Dickinson of Deloitte representing the Church Commissioners.
Hello, it's Timothy Duffy. I have an interest in the site known as GA4, so I'm sort of an interested party rather than a resident.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Ian Beattie. I'm a resident of Cleadon.
Yes, good morning. I'm Mervyn Butler, Secretary of Cleadon Eastbourne Labour Party.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, as I say, I'm going to work to the agenda. I'm sort of anticipating working through to around about 11 o'clock. We'll then have a mid-morning adjournment, and then we'll see where we are in terms of the agenda. Before we get into the agenda items, Mr. Duffy, is it?
Yeah. Yes. So when I attended last Tuesday, I made a point about the document management and things. I've since been onto the website, and this was mainly to do with the indexing of the documents, and I can let you know that there is an index there, albeit it isn't quite complete. The current index has 169 entries covering 275 separate documents and totaling 19,811 pages. So that covers the those are the documents that are indexed. Actually, on the website, in total there are 491 documents, totaling 23,996 pages, and obviously my question on Tuesday was, you know, how do we access the documents? And the council had said that all the documents are on the website, but I do feel that a comprehensive index would help all parties, and certainly incomplete document management may have given rise to prejudicing the outcome of this examination. I'd also point out that at Regulation 19 there were 104. I couldn't be certain, but I found 148 documents totaling 9,638 pages. Anyway, so this point was really just about document management and indexing.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to focus on the matter that's before me. I understand your representation, and you made the point previously. I will reflect on what you're saying. The examination is obviously still ongoing. I appreciate there is a lot of material that is not uncommon for plan examinations, but I take the point in terms of accessibility. Mr. Beattie, please.
Yes, just very briefly in support of Mr. Duffy. I personally, I mean, I was used to dealing with a lot of documentation in the work that I did, but since I've retired, I have found it very, very difficult to keep up with what's going on. I mean, and keep track of difficulties, keeping track of what I've been doing over 9-10 years in opposition to this, but more so in the updates on the website. It's virtually impossible for a resident to be able to actually keep pace with that. But particularly, I mean, the younger residents are working, don't have the time. The older residents are out of practice. It's a serious issue. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, it is, as I say, I'll reflect on those points if I need to speak to the programme officer about anything. I mean, I have to say there's nothing to date that struck me as unusual or particularly difficult about this plan examination in terms of how documents are being managed or filed. I appreciate as part of these processes there just are inherently a lot of documents, and will be documents updated. There is an update examination news item on the examination webpage. I do want to move on to the Cleadon discussion. The points have been made. They are registered with me, and I'll reflect on that. But we do need to use the time this morning to discuss Cleadon, please. So if I can turn to the I'm going to go straight to the second item of my agenda in terms of Greenbelt impacts and compensatory improvements. I've outlined the purpose of this session. We're looking today at its parcel CL1 within the Greenbelt review study that the Council has prepared. I appreciate there are those seated to my left who disagree with the outcome of that process and think the site should be assessed differently, but can I first turn to the Council to explain, by reference to my matters and issues questions 552 and 553, how you've looked at the Greenbelt parcel, and perhaps in relation to this site, there's clearly the site we're looking at, GA4, has been considered on its own as that particular parcel of the Greenbelt, and then a land immediately to the south of Moor Lane is given a higher, or comes into actually the highest level of harm for Greenbelt impacts as we go south of Moor Lane and over towards the Sunderland Football Academy. But this site has been looked at on its own terms as part of parcel CL1. So I invite the Council first, please.
Yes, that's correct. So the parcel has been assessed by itself. The South Tyneside Greenbelt study has identified that the release of the site would have a moderate harm rating against purposes 1, 2 and 3 and a low rating against purpose 4. Appendix C of the Greenbelt study sets out that assessment in a little more detail and provides a bit more context. It is worth noting that that section does state that Moor Lane to the south and Sunderland Road to the west represent relatively strong, regular alternative Greenbelt boundaries in that area. In terms of offsetting impacts, that's also been formed by Appendix C of the Greenbelt review and also the site frameworks document, where those points have been taken forward into policy SP7 in terms of creating a defensible boundary and ensuring that the landscaping is an integral part of the design and ensure that built development set back to retain openness along the A1018 roadside there. Also, as mentioned yesterday and discussed in relation to matter GA2, policy SP7 and supporting text does require allocations to provide compensatory improvements to the Greenbelt, but as discussed yesterday, it's something I will look into further with this site.
Thank you. So if I turn to my left, this is an area of the Greenbelt that's been assessed as kind of having, from the Council's evidence, moderate harm. The Council's outlined there that part of the rationale for that is the way in which Moor Lane and Sunderland Road bound the site in terms of providing separation from the wider Greenbelt at this point. Just to let everybody know, I should have said by way of introduction, I've been to the area, I've viewed the site. You can obviously clearly view it from either Moor Lane or from Sunderland Road. I've been able to appreciate the Greenbelt that's between Cleadon and Sunderland. But if I invite others to perhaps explain to me why this site should be considered as having a higher or degree of harm or impact on the Greenbelt. If I can start with Mr. Butler first, please, and then we'll work our way down.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Lamb has corrected the statement which the Council put out. It is correct to say that the assessment in the Greenbelt study says it's moderate for all three purposes, 1, 2 and 3. That's not what in their statement at 5215. And I think you've accepted, sir, that the Council's used a system whereby it's taken the highest of any of the harm ratings. But in contrast to site GA2 yesterday, where the Council accepted the moderate rating because it was only one purpose. Here we have moderate rating for 3 purposes. And the detail in the study accepts that the site does contribute to checking urban sprawl between the large built-up areas of South Tyneside and Sunderland. It also states that the development of the site would be considered to reduce the gap between the neighbouring towns. And finally accepts that the site is part of the countryside and so contributes to preventing encroachment on it. Development of the site would be considered encroachment on the countryside, and in view of this, we consider that the harm findings are not justified and should find a level of higher harm. Notwithstanding the boundaries that you referred to, sir, the views along both Sunderland Road and Moor Lane, both north and south, are extensive, and they enable anyone in those areas to look towards Cleadon Hills and to look towards Penchwell Monument and the wider area in County Durham and Tyne Wear in County Durham. So there are important issues there in terms of views, and the impact of moderate, I think, is something I would ask you to look at further. The second point I want to make about the assessment, and I made this point last week, is the study doesn't take into account the proposal for the solar farm on the field immediately to the south of GA4. This is currently subject to a planning application which would require the applicants to provide very special circumstances for this development to be approved in the Greenbelt. However, in our view, it has a direct impact on the assessment of the harm of the Greenbelt when considered alongside the proposed housing site. You'll see from the framework document put forward by the site promoters that they show that their houses at the southern part of the site would have views over the open space. They would also have views over a huge solar farm. And therefore, I think the urbanisation of that area, and you said yourself, sir, this morning, that that field has a much higher value in terms of Greenbelt. We're yet to find out what will happen with the solar farm proposal, but in our view, it is very relevant to this assessment. Do you want me to deal with compensatory improvements now? Thank you. We consider that policy SP7, the key considerations should reflect what's in the Greenbelt study. The study identifies 7 potential enhancement measures involving nearby sites, including the Baldon Flats local wildlife site. And the study itself is obviously looking, if you were minded to allocate this site, as to whether compensatory improvements in the wider Greenbelt would occur. And I want to focus on the Baldon Flats local wildlife site. This is a site that is cherished by the 2 villages, the residents of the 2 villages, the local communities, for its importance. And the study suggests that enhancements should support thoughtful access that does not put excessive pressure on the most sensitive wetland habitats. And that could include boardwalks, upgraded paths, quiet seating areas, bird hides, nature interpretation resources. As we know and discussed previously, the Baldon Flats is in the ownership of the Church Commissioners. I would commend the work that's been done between the Church Commissioners, East Baldon Neighbourhood Forum and the Durham Wildlife Trust, who have now got a temporary management agreement on the Baldon Flats. And therefore, I think if we are looking to move forward for this site, those compensatory measures, which are also detailed in the Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy, will be vitally important. And finally, we'll come on to this later, part of the site is designated as part of the Wildlife Corridor. And we consider that it's important that on-site mitigation is enhancing the part of the site as part of the Wildlife Corridor. And in fact, the site framework does show there wouldn't be proposals for development because of the proposed SUDS area where the Wildlife Corridor intersects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Before I bring in others, can I turn to the council and Mr. Dickinson? I appreciate the council's going to go away not only in relation to this site but other sites, kind of just look again at the issue around compensatory provision. I think I recall from yesterday, I appreciate from the council's perspective, what the Greenbelt study says is these are potential kind of options for mitigation, compensatory improvement. But given what I've heard from Mr. Butler specifically around this site and the assertion or the claim that the Bolden, the Bolden Flats local wildlife site is also under the control of the church commissioners, is this something that could be looked at further? I don't know, Mr. Dickinson, you're able to come in first and then...
Of course. Absolutely. The view that the church commissioners take is that they will look at a strategic approach to improving the Greenbelt, utilising the church's land to mitigate any impact that it would have. And it would work hand in hand with the council to identify and implement them. I would say that obviously the compensation would need to be proportionate to the impact of the development and will be an assessment if and when a planning application comes forward.
Thank you. Can I invite the council, when you're considering, I know you're going to sort of go away and look at compensatory improvements, given what I've heard from Mr. Butler and from the church commissioners, whether this can be specifically looked at as part of that exercise. I'm going to make a note of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Beattie next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, the main thrust of what I'd like to say is that I'll introduce myself very briefly. It won't take long. I've lived there for a long time, and with my neighbours, some of who are behind me, but many others who've asked us to speak today, we've been campaigning since 2016 against this, and we found some of the original site assessments in relation to what is now GA4 very discretionary is a word I would use. I would use a stronger word actually, but I'll use discretionary today. So I'd like to point those out. But just before I do, I do not believe that any special circumstances have been proven to actually reduce this Greenbelt area. And as Mr. Butler said earlier, the development of GA4 would reduce the Greenbelt separation area at that point by something of the order of 600 or 700 yards, which is quite significant. It would encourage urban sprawl and encourage effectively encourage the merging of South Tyneside at that point with the fringe area of North Sunderland, of Sunderland, or the northern fringe area of Sunderland, rather. But, you know, in addition to the things that Mr. Butler said, I would just also like to say that the development will close off the land and restrict views and the openness, which if you visited it, and we can refer to a statement that was made by the Conservation Management Report a number of years ago. I'll make reference to that later, but it particularly makes reference to that site being open on the approach from the south. Yeah, the approach from the south into Cleadon village. So yeah, if I just move on briefly to the actual what we picked up, some examples of the anomalies, and I'll just sort of mention these. This is going back to, we've mentioned them in all of our objections since 2016, but there was a strategic land review carried out by the council to identify potential sites that were potentially available to develop, and there were a lot of them, well over 100, I believe. And I mean, that site, for example, was referenced. Was it CA44 at the time, or something like that? CB44, Cleadon Bolden 44. So you can see how many sites, that was just within Borden, so you can see how many sites were actually up for review at that point in time. Anyway, a couple of examples. The site, the GA4, I'm going to refer to it as GA4, although it confuses me. But it's 10.4 hectares, so it's approximately 25 acres, yeah? Now, with reference to the green belt, in the SLR review, under a category called protecting the green belt, which is not a category I invented, it's a council category, right? That particular site was given the lowest rating of amber, and a comment in support of that rating was, at that time, that development of this site would result in the loss of an area of green belt adjacent to existing built-up area. So the site size area, as I say, is 10.4 hectares. But other sites of similar size were given a red rating, which we couldn't understand. There didn't seem to be any logic behind it. There didn't seem to be any objectivity behind some of these assessments. They seem to be very subjective, and they seem to be heavily weighted against what is now termed GA4. So, as an example, the site directly opposite GA4, but on the other side of the road, on the other side of the A1018, which is the main Sunderland South Shields Road, there's a site, at the time, I mean, I don't know what the reference is now, I've lost track of it all, but SWH021 is 13.9 hectares. And that was given a red rating, although it's directly opposite the site that you're talking about developing. And although it is slightly bigger, 10.4 hectares versus 13.9. So the example, a slightly larger site directly opposite GA4 on the other side of the A1018 was given a red rating, and with the comment that development would result in the loss of an area of green belt land that would therefore score very negatively against this objective. So, where's the logic in that? Right. Second category in reference to the green belt that were picked up on, and there were a few of these. But there was a category called enhancing green infrastructure, and GA4 was given a yellow rating at that time with the following comment: it forms, GA4 that is, forms part of a wider green infrastructure corridor and is in close proximity to local wildlife site and SSI development, and would have a neutral impact. But other sites, similar size and similarly assessed, were deemed to have a negative impact. In fact, the site that I've just mentioned, directly opposite GA4, but on the other side of the road, was given an amber rating with the comment that development would have a negative impact and mitigation would be required. So we brought all these up at the time, but we didn't ever get any answers to them. I mean, and I think that goes back to one of the points we made earlier, that you make these comments and you make these objections and you don't really get much feedback. Anyway,
thank you, Mr. Beattie. Oh, and obviously, some of this is before me in terms of the background. No, not yeah. What I want to focus on is we've obviously got the Greenbelt Review evidence that's before me that is part of this plan, and I want to understand from your perspective why that evidence, the current evidence, I appreciate there was a long history and background to plan making within South Tyneside, but what I want to focus on is whether the current evidence that's before me in terms of the Greenbelt Review that assesses this site as moderate harm is not justified. Whether ultimately, I think what you're saying is I would need to be, you would invite me to say that there should be a higher, as Mr. Butler said, a higher degree of harm associated with this site because of the openness, impact on the countryside. Mm-hmm. I'm not want to cut you off.
No, I understand. Yes. No, I mean, I just thought we should give you some examples to try to justify why we thought it was a biased rating an unduly low rating at the time. And, you know, I think I made the point, and thank you for allowing me to make it.
That's fine. I honestly, I don't want to cut across, but I'm mindful others want to be heard as well. Yeah. And
can I just add, not particularly on the ratings, but from that particular site, there's uninterrupted views to the coast. There's views of Pension Monument and Cleadon Water Tower and Cleadon Mill. Sometime after the site ratings were changed and upgraded, but there wasn't any change to the overall rating of the site as being potentially available for development. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to Mr. Duffy, please.
Thank you. So, first of all, so we're looking at this point. The site, I looked through the documents, and the site has various designations. I'll give you a short list. It's called GA4, SBC 051, Action Plan 5, Field 78, Area 25, West Hall Farm, and sometimes erroneously and misleadingly, Land at North Farm. Now, that sort of causes confusion amongst those trying to make their representations, but it also causes confusion for the consultants. And let me just see if I can get here. Yep. So this is the LUC report, and the heading on Chapter 5, page 75, identifies GA4 as Land at North Farm. Now, clearly this is West Farm. So there's confusion amongst perhaps those making their representations. There's a confusion within those presenting the case, and yeah, so I'll leave that there. Turning to the LUC methodology, I listened into their presentation on, or their presentation on the Wednesday last week, and it's not a standardised methodology. It's an in-house methodology, and picking up the point of Mr. Beattie, it's slightly subjective and not necessarily objective. I could imagine that if the council had invited a different consultant to come and prepare the sustainability appraisal, then they may have come up with different results. So the point is, it's an in-house methodology. Perhaps there isn't a standardised methodology out there. So this is this. So the council in their presentations, and I can't quite remember the day. I have got a reference to this, but the council, in support of the green belt, said, protect the green belt. It's a limited resource. Release has great sensitivity. Treat it very carefully. Now, those were quotes from Mr. Shadoravian, and I believe those took place on Thursday session. I do have a reference for that. The green belt in numbers. So the South Tyneside administrative area covers 6,442 hectares. These are from key governmental data, by the way. There's large spreadsheets of these. The allocated green belt covers 2,350 hectares, and the area of farmland covers 991 hectares. So, in essence, this 10-acre field represents if my maths is correct, about 1% of the farmland. But picking up the point of Mr. Butler regarding the site immediately to the south, which is the solar farm, the application currently in covers relates to an area of 47 hectares. With this is a substantial application, 47 hectares, and the 61,488 solar panels. Not only that, there's also 4.7 kilometres of high security fencing proposed to be surrounding the site. Now, just thinking about these in a strategic term, the green belt is a limited resource, and in fact, the land available to South Tyneside is limited as well. And I always think of an analogy related to Christmas and the wrapping paper, where you have a present and you decide which piece of wrapping paper you're going to use. And when you use you pick out various bits of, and it's never quite enough to cover the parcel, and you have to start with a new sheet of paper. So yeah, I think basically the wrapping paper isn't necessarily big enough to sustain the ambitions of the local authority in this submission. Yeah. So
thank you. I mean, Mr. Duffy, from reading your representations on the plan back in early 2024,
sure.
I think from correct me if I'm wrong in summarising them, I think you're probably going to invite me, similarly to Mr. Butler, to say when you look at the kind of the various kind of green belt harms and purposes, moderate is too low, and in relation to this site, that should be higher. And I think you've directed me to how Sunderland looked at their corresponding part of the green belt.
yes, so there was a reliance by Sunderland City Council in their local plan, and basically they said that they were relying on South Tyneside to provide the green belt buffer because there was no option for them, and this comes back again to the duty to cooperate, and I never found any evidence that there was meaningful cooperation between the two parties. I would have half expected that that somebody from South Tyneside would have picked up the phone to their corresponding colleague in Sunderland and kind of, hello Bob, it's Jerry here. You know, we need to have a chat about our emerging local plan. Can we meet? And then the output from that, so that would then produce an agenda. There would be a discussion, and then there would be minutes of that. And I've not found anything of that in the documentation presented, certainly at regulation 19 level.
Thank you. Yep, we'll obviously pick that up as part of the first day. So I'm reflecting on those points. So thank you. If we can just before I move on and bring in other people, obviously I think when I'm looking at the green belt, there's going to be a large degree of, I've been out to the sites. I'm going to reflect on that and possibly very likely go back again. When I do go back again, perhaps Mr. Beattie, I mean, is there any kind of specific, I mean, I can walk Sunderland Road, I can walk, is it Moor Lane, Moor Road? Moor Lane. Particular thing, viewpoint or perspective that you want me to kind of have particular regard to?
Well, I think obviously the Moor Lane, the view from Moor Lane is important. But if you were to go in, I mean, you can actually get into the site at just beyond the housing at on Sunderland Road, and you can see the views from there. You can see clearly over to the south. You can see to the east, and from the middle of that particular site, you could probably see up to Cleadon Hills, to the water tower and Cleadon Mill. So it would be I mean, it's not unheard of for people to be in the middle of that place, of that site, looking around. Although it's got I think it's got wheat in it at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. If I can bring in other people, so is it Mr. Dickinson next for Church Commissioners?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, there was a couple of points raised that I would just like to respond on. Firstly, the points raised around exceptional circumstances. I don't believe that this is the hearing session to discuss whether it is the circumstances are right for the council to review their greenbelt boundary in totality. This is the specific nature of the application, so I'll leave it to the council to discuss their methodology through which they came to exceptional circumstances based on housing need, etc. I think that there was another point around whether it was justified, and I think that the council have produced robust evidence through a greenbelt review and the subsequent amendments and clarifications that they've posted on these points. And then finally, there was a point around whether you consider this site distinct and requiring its own assessment, or it should be viewed in the wider, especially given the neighbouring site speculative planning application for a solar farm. Obviously, the Church Commissioners are not the applicant for the solar farm, so we can't speak to that or its progress or where it is. But from our point of view, it's a planning application that's being determined, so we cannot consider it at this point. I think that from our point of view and the Church Commissioners' ownership, the site is owned by the Church Commissioners as a single owner. It is bound to the north and west by housing, and that there are strong defensible boundaries along Moor Lane and Sunderland Road, which are utilised roads, which I think in all representations have been cited for their use. And that creates a very defensible and permanent boundary to the site when assessing it against the Green Belt principles, especially when you consider the exceptional circumstances about making alterations to the Green Belt so that no further alterations are required at the end of the plan period. Obviously, in terms of the site, the Church Commissioners and the Council have a statement of common ground where at 5.1 they've set out the key considerations and the specific modifications that they believe are necessary to mitigate those impacts. So I would draw the inspector's attention to those in terms of assessing the impact of the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Butler? No? Is that microphone on from earlier? Okay. Thank you. Can I understand from the council, I think I heard about this in week 1, possibly under matter 3, the solar farm proposal is not yet determined, is that correct? It's currently a planning application with the authority, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Before I move off from the Greenbelt issue, final point on this, Mr. Duffy.
Yes, thank you, sir. It would be just to highlight the importance in terms of agriculture in the borough, and basically 991 hectares is in agricultural land, and 50 hectares represents each release of 50 hectares amounts to 5%, and also available on the government land databases. there's 17 farmers in South Tyneside, and the average ownership is, the average land take for each farmer is 58 hectares. So a 50 hectare plot represents 5% and one farmer. I'm minded to think that as a society, we first need water, then we need food, then we need shelter, and food ranks higher than shelter. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on Greenbelt, but I think we're going to sort of overlap with agricultural land. Mr. Beattie, that's okay.
Thank you. And just touching on point from Mr. Duffy there. I've lived there for 35 years approximately, and the GA4 has been farmed and has produced a productive crop every year that I've been there, as far as I'm aware. And the current farmer has indicated that it is a kind of situation, he's got a situation where if that land was removed, his livelihood might become unviable. He hasn't said it will become unviable, but he's indicated that it's marginal at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate I did have a question for this as part of my MIQs. I hadn't raised it necessarily on the agenda, but I'm clear from the council's position that we discussed at previous sessions. But I think just looking at the council's statement, Mrs. Lamb, this is not compared to the Boldens where we were looking at yesterday, where the latest data provides a distinction between grade 3A and 3B, so we're still in a position of it's grade 3, but the council's assumed for the purposes of assessing the plan it's grade 3A, the higher grade.
Yes, that's correct. So through the sustainability appraisal, site-specific assessments, then we have made that assumption, and as shown in the map included in our hearing statement, map 10, that shows the updated classifications from Magic Maps and DEFRA.
Mr. Dickinson, please.
I'd also just like to raise that this is a point that is part of the Statement of Common Ground at 4.10.
Thank you. I'm going to move on in terms of the agenda, please. Item 3 is around protected habitats and wading birds monitoring. I think from the council, I'm under no illusion that this site is firmly within the 7.2 kilometre buffer from protected habitats. So if development was to take place here, it would need to contribute into the mitigation or scheme in terms of financial contribution to management. But I wanted to know in my MIQ 554 this issue around wading birds monitoring and the key consideration that's in the policy in terms of requiring further data and what that potentially means for the potential development of this site, please.
Okay, yes. So, yeah, just to clarify, this site does not host any of the qualifying features for the Durham Coast SAC or Northumbria Coast SPA. The wading birds, as we sort of touched on last week, the surveys that were undertaken were in response to sort of knowledge that wading birds do use the fields around the coast. So the wading bird studies were undertaken to get a further knowledge and understanding of what the impacts could be of development on these species. So as set out in the council's response to 5.54, the wading bird study identified that GA4 was identified as an amber site, and it was used by some bird species through the monitoring surveys. The wading bird survey document NAT 20 sets out potential mitigation measures that can be undertaken to help offset the impacts of development should that come forward. And one of the points that was raised is in section F1 of the wading bird survey, which identifies the mitigation requirements, and that said that any planned application is supported by at least 1 year's one season of additional one season's additional non-breeding monitoring data for fields within 750 metres, including nocturnal survey and appropriate equipment. So this is just to make sure that when the plan application comes forward, it's informed by the most robust and up-to-date data for the wading birds. Obviously, how fields are managed obviously affects how the birds use the field. So if it's being ploughed, depending on what crops are in there, it all has an impact on the fields are used. So it's that requirement is in there as a key consideration to make sure that the information being assessed at plan application stage is as robust as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Butler next, please.
Thank you, sir. In our view, it's essential that the proposed additional non-breeding monitoring data for wading birds for the fields is carried out, including a nocturnal survey with appropriate equipment. I'm puzzled by the situation over the area of this survey, sir. In the council statement at 5223, as Mrs. Lamb has said, the monitoring data for fields should be within 750 metres of the site. However, in the statement of common ground submitted to you by the council and the church commissioners, it says that it should be within 500 metres, which was in previous discussions. I would submit that if the advice from the wading bird survey is 750 metres, it should be 750 metres. And secondly, it says that this should be carried out where practicable. The situation is that this site is in close proximity to the regionally important Baldwin Flats wildlife site, and mean that the fields are regularly visited by wading birds. These surveys were carried out for the field immediately to the south in connection with the proposed solar farm planning application, and revealed not only significant use by visiting wading birds, but also breeding of several pairs of avocets last year. And indeed, in the council statement itself, it does accept that GA4 was used by lapwing in 1919 to 20 surveys. So we have clear evidence of wading birds using both the field and the surrounding fields, and it's their connection to the Baldwin Flats site that's most important of why these surveys are needed. So I'd seek clarity. Are we talking about 500 metres or 750, please?
Shall I invite Mr. Dickinson first and then to the council, please?
I just wanted to clarify the point around where practicable. That is a point specifically around access. Obviously, the church commissioners can grant access onto their own land, but if land is outside of the ownership of the church commissioners, they would do everything in their power to try and find the most appropriate locations to do the monitoring as part of the methodology.
Okay. And in relation to the issue of the 750 metres versus 500 metres?
Yes, it should be 750 metres. It's set out in the council's statement in paragraph 5.225 that it did say 500 metres in the Reg 19 plan, but to make sure it corresponds with the evidence, it should be 750 metres, and that we'll also pick that up in the statement of common ground for clarification.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. I'm going to move on in terms of the agenda, please. In relation to looking at alterations to the Greenbelt and considerations of exceptional circumstances, one of the factors in the National Planning Policy Framework is whether sites are well served or would be well served by public transport. If I can turn to the council first, please. It's at response to my MIQ 555. I've obviously been to the site. I've observed various bus stops, indeed one directly adjacent to this site. But if I can turn to the council first, please, in terms of how it's considered this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the site is well related to facilities in Cleadon, and it's well served by public transport. Firstly, in terms of retail, there are two clusters of retail and services within Cleadon. These are East Boldon Road and Front Street. East Boldon Road is designated as a local neighbourhood hub in the local plan. Front Street is designated as a local centre, and those findings were informed by the local centres and neighbourhood hubs commentary, which forms part of the overall retail study. So in terms of active travel opportunities, the Council has an adopted local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, and Appendix 8 active travel routes and local plan housing allocations in the infrastructure delivery plan shows that the site is next to an existing active travel route and close to proposed active travel routes. Moving on to public transport, there are a number of bus stops in the area providing services which travel around the borough and to Sunderland. And there's also many school bus services in the area, allowing access to a number of different schools. And the site is approximately 1.5 kilometres away from East Boldon Metro Station, and the station has direct regular services towards South Hilton and also towards Newcastle Airport. Table 9 of the Council's response to MIQ 5.55 provides details of which bus services are accessible from the site and includes their destinations and frequency. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify with the Council from yesterday, when we were looking at the Boldons, there was a reference to bus 30 being a half-hourly service, and a note in table 9 there's another I don't know, it's the same 30, Mr. Mail?
Yes, that's correct, and the service is indeed an hourly service. I think it's in our representations rather than a half-hourly service. That is indeed hourly service.
Okay.
I think the reference to the half-hourly service is indeed, could be in reflection to the 24 service that runs from South Shields to Sunderland. I believe that's possibly a 15-minute frequency. Just for clarification, the 30 service comes into the Cleadon area via Whitburn Road onto the 1018, and obviously the 24 service runs parallel to the actual site in question. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Okay, in terms of other submissions, Mr. Butler, please.
Just for clarity, yesterday I think it was me who said that the 30 service was a half-hourly service and was reduced to an hourly service.
Mr. Butler, in relation to this site and whether it's reasonable to conclude that it is well served by public transport, please.
Thank you, sir. In terms of access to East Boldon Metro Station, residents along Moor Lane have long campaigned for a footpath link along the rural part of the road to East Boldon Metro Station. If site GA4 is developed, then demand for pedestrian access to the metro station will increase. The Council has plans for the rural part of Moor Lane to be designated as a quiet lane, which would provide safer pedestrian and cycle route, and indeed, as we heard, there is proposals for cycling in the active travel proposals. Such a footpath would also give access to the local wildlife site. In addition, we feel that the site itself, in terms of the framework outline, could benefit from access from the southwest corner to linking onto Moor Lane, so that would provide a direct access for pedestrians and cyclists to head towards the metro station, and secondly from the northeast corner, which would allow access by cycle and foot to the village centre. So there were two key points that we've made in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beattie, I've read from your representations, I think you're concerned this will become a car-dependent development.
Yes, I would just point out a couple of things. The Service 24 which runs from South Shields to Sunderland, and Sunderland to South Shields, obviously. That's been reduced in frequency in recent years. It's okay for commuting if you're going to Sunderland or the South Shields, but obviously nowhere else. The metro is absolutely packed to the point of not being usable for anyone else at peak times. So if you try to get on, peak times, it's very difficult. And parking is difficult at the metro already. I don't believe that if that site is developed, anyone will walk to the metro, and they won't walk to Cleadon Village either. There's no parking in Cleadon Village as it is. So it will become a car-dependent development. And it's interesting that in the local paper last night, there was an article stating that Sunderland Road, as it approaches Cleadon, is the 10th most polluted spot in South Tyneside, with 3 times the Third World Health Organisation's recommended limits of nitrogen dioxide. So it's already a busy road, but it will, this will make it.
Thank you, Mr. Beattie. Mr. Duffy next, please.
Yeah, it's more of an observation, and it's possibly objective as to whether it's well served or decently served, but the point that Mr. Beattie made is north-south links are very good, east-west aren't, and the facilities are not that great. There's no information boards in the bus shelters giving the next service and stuff. There could be some useful work gone into those sort of communication links so that people know exactly where they stand. That's all I'll say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, Mr. Beattie, and then I'll bring in...
A very brief point. Currently, there is no footpath on the development side of the A1018.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mail, you were able yesterday to bring me to attention of East Bolton data. I don't know.
Yeah,
I hadn't envisaged this, but I don't know if you've got it at your fingertips or whether you recognise what's been said about Cleadon.
I actually read the article itself last night, so I think I'm sort of heavily involved in the non-continuous data monitoring from an air quality perspective. We use diffusion tubes. There's a range of sites that have been quoted in the Cleadon area as well. What we tend to focus on in exceedance levels is DEFRA related rather than the World Health Organization. I can quantify that in terms of the sites in question. There's been no exceedances in nitrogen dioxide over the last 5 years. And the Council reports that on a regular basis through its annual status report into DEFRA. I think in terms of some of the comments that have been made in terms of the infrastructure needs around the site, in terms of potential footpaths, improved linkages, improved bus stop facilities, we would expect that to probably come forward as part of the transport assessment and the fallout from that. And then the Council would indeed pick up on that. Again, I think it's been raised around, as of yesterday, the capacity of the car parking situation at East Bolton Metro Station. That is in our infrastructure delivery plan. As we said yesterday, we've long campaigned with Nexus and supported Nexus with regards to that. The site in question is a Network Rail asset. That said, we would support Nexus in any development of expanding that potential car park subject to the land being made available. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Dickinson and then Mr. Beattie.
I'd just like to put on record that the Church Commissioners agree with the statement just made, and that any future planning application will be supported with a robust transport assessment from which the impacts on things like parking, public transport and driving facilities will be considered, and mitigations when necessary will be identified.
Mr. Beattie, please.
close to the site. Yeah, and East Baldwin Road was mentioned, and there's a couple of hairdressers there, and I think there's a cafe there, but there isn't any shop as such. So just to correct that point.
Yeah.
Thank you for those. We're going to move on in terms of, it's a related issue. It's item 5 on my agenda in terms of whether safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved, just in general terms. And then I was keen to just understand, because the policy itself requires consideration of improving the Moor Lane, Sunderland Road staggered junction, and whether that's justified, whether there's evidence that that is a junction that does need some improvement, either because of safety issues or general highway capacity flow of traffic. If I could turn to the council first, if it's something you've put in the plan as a key consideration for this site, what the basis for that is.
Thank you, sir. So firstly, we'd say that yes, safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved. The site has been considered through the strategic housing land availability process, and no particular concerns were raised by the council's transport team. In terms of the modelling that was undertaken for the local road network assessment, that basically demonstrated some increased queuing and delay on the side road arms. And as a result of that, the assessment recommended the introduction of a scheme that would allow increased opportunities for vehicles to move to and from the side roads. So that's where that requirement has come from. And it could also incorporate crossings which would assist pedestrians to cross all arms of the junction. Thank you.
Go to Mr. Dickinson next, then to Mr. Butler, and then to Mr. Duffy. So Mr. Dickinson first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think that just to draw your attention to the statement of common ground, obviously we believe that this is one of the the key considerations for the site at bullet point 4 of the statement of common ground, and just to add the additional where appropriate to the key considerations. And I would just draw attention again to the point was raised to the last matter, which is all of this will be considered in a detailed transport assessment, which will support the planning application and make recommendations on improvements to junctions and access.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, please, first.
Thank you, sir. The matter here that we're looking at is the key considerations to a site allocation of a large housing site. And I think that to keep referring to the fact that these matters will be swept up in any traffic assessment that comes with a planning application isn't sufficient for the judgment that you're going to have to make as to whether this is a viable site to take forward. In the council's statement to you, they accept that this is one of the sites that will contribute to the fact that 5 junctions in the villages will require mitigation, and it's one of the top 5 contributors to that peak. Starting with the Moor Lane Sunderland Road junction, it is, in our view, justified to explore that opportunity. And again, I would ask what where appropriate means. The council were quite clear that that was something, put it in the key considerations, and then we find in the statement of common ground that the term where appropriate appears. The road is Moor Lane, has had some traffic calming measures to a 20-mile-an-hour zone in the residential area, but the route from Moor Lane across that staggered junction to Whitburn and the coast is still a very well-used route, and obviously it intersects with a very busy Sunderland to South Shields Road. The other measures that need consideration following traffic from the site is the issue of further congestion in Cleadon village centre. And in the INV5 report, the assessment of the junction 23, the 1018 Cleadon Lane priority junction, that assessment does accept that one arm can be seen to be operating in excess of theoretical capacity in the evening peak, although in the IDP 25 report, it's only considered to be desirable and a achievable date of 2035. This proposal is to look at a signalling solution to the centre of Cleadon village, and there's no doubt that there is a lot of issues that would need to resolve in terms of the traffic control in the centre of Cleadon village, and one wonders whether this development generating this extra traffic should not be considered to bring that forward in terms of the IDP situation. You also have the impact on the junction of Whitburn Road to the 1018, where you have a right turning lane when heading south to get into Whitburn Road, and the difficulties of turning right out of Whitburn Road towards Sunderland to the south. And linking to those manoeuvres, the proposal by the site promoters in their Regulation 19 submission for access to the site itself is two ghost island junctions, as they call them, two right-hand turning lanes into the site to enable traffic from the north to enter the site. So that would mean we'd have three right-hand turning lanes within about 500 metres along the 1018. The 30-mile-an-hour limit clearly would have to be adjusted if you're going to have those two right-hand turning lanes. But it does seem that there needs to be a lot further work as to whether you could practically have the two access points as being suggested by the site promoters at this point. So again, I would ask that that's considered carefully by yourself. And finally, there is the wider impact of traffic from this site in East Bolton and the 184 corridor, which we touched upon yesterday. A lot of people from this site will travel through East Bolton towards the A19, and that will only exacerbate the problems that we heard about yesterday of those junctions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so that 1018 road, just to the north of the site, sir, there is a junction between the 1018 and a road called Whitburn Road. I believe it might be the B1299. It may not be. But there was recently some signalling, some roadworks happening around that area, and very quickly the traffic could be seen to be backing up, travelling from Sunderland into Cleadon, and almost clogging up the junction, the very junction that we're talking about. Now, bearing in mind that the construction phase on such a site, I believe the church, the owners of the site have identified that a construction phase, they would look to build out in about 5 years the 259 dwellings, but conceivably there'd be infrastructure works before that and an overhang. So a 7-year period of construction traffic be a complete nightmare, I'm afraid. And I'm also mindful that in the local area, because of the nature of the land use, there are a lot of horse riding, and there's a travelling community that actively use pony and traps, and there's seemingly no age limit on who can drive a pony and trap, because these are often young people, aged perhaps young teenagers, going about their lawful past time, and the junction isn't, the current junction isn't designed to facilitate that. Literally 3 days ago, I witnessed somebody riding a horse. It was a young girl riding a horse at the junction, being led by somebody who was watching over her, but they had great difficulty in crossing the road until I halted the traffic on the. As I was driving, I just slowed up to give them a bit of space to cross, and we're talking a lot about cars and traffic, but there are pedestrians. There's there's pedestrians, there's horse traffic, there's cyclists as well as the cars. And any extra pressure on that junction, which has quite a history of accidents on right-turning vehicles, that would be awkward. I think that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of clarifications on the points just made. Firstly, it won't be a traffic assessment, it will be a transport assessment, so it will assess multiple modes of transport and their appropriateness. I think that the other point was raised around the 2 access points to the development. Those are reserved matters if you're looking at planning applications, and they will be fully considered either alongside the outline application or as a reserved matters application subsequent to outline consent. And the point around where appropriate on the wording of the key considerations, obviously the church have submitted their evidence alongside their vision documents, etc., around what is currently understood to be the traffic impacts on that junction, and will again reassess at the time of the planning application, because as time passes, uses change, and the church are very aware and want to deliver sustainable development at this location. And sorry, the last point of clarification was the delivery time period raised by Mr. Duffy, saying 7 years, but as set out in the Statement of Common Ground trajectory, it's between 2028 to 2033, which is 5 years. And I'm sure we'll discuss that in a minute.
We will. Okay. Before I move off transport and access, final point from Mr. Beattie.
Yes, briefly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, briefly, it's worth pointing out that the A1018 is a regularly used emergency transport route for police cars, but ambulances particularly, fire engines, so they're coming down there all the time. So point Mr. Butler made about the 3 barriers really to progress along that road in the future potentially would be a lot more significant than you would imagine. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is around wider infrastructure requirements. This is a theme I've picked up through various questions from various sites. So the key considerations for this site, and indeed for others, don't necessarily outline or say specific infrastructure requirements are necessarily identified. I appreciate there are other policies of the plan that deal with that. But if I could turn to the council now to just briefly, in terms of your response to my MIQ 557, in terms of potential infrastructure requirements from the sort of approximately 260 houses, and how the council's looked at that, please. Mr. Clifford.
Thank you, sir. It is acknowledged there will be social infrastructure impacts as a result of the proposed development. As you've referenced, there are policies in the plan which address that, SP 25, 50, 59 and 60, in terms of the development management process. So firstly, in terms of school places, just to explain firstly, primary school places, the assessment is on an area basis. So there are 6 primary school planning areas for the borough that the school places planning team use, and area 6 is the villages. So it's on an area basis, and regarding primary school places, the assessment in the infrastructure delivery plan is that West Bolden Primary School and Whitburn Village Primary School can be appropriately extended to accommodate local plan impacts in that area. And just to add to that, we have undertaken high-level feasibility work. So when we say they can be appropriately extended, we have done some analysis. Regarding secondary school places, the assessment for that area shows that Bolden Secondary School has the potential to accommodate pupils from residential development in the area. Regarding, I just also reiterate that, as previously stated, there are many school bus services which run in the area, allowing access to a number of different schools. Moving on to primary care capacity, the Council has liaised with the Integrated Care Board during the preparation of the infrastructure delivery plan. That liaison is ongoing because the IDP is a live document. And if a planning application is submitted, then the ICB will be consulted. I could go on to junctions, etc., but I think we've covered that.
Can turn to others on my left, so starting with Mr. Butler in terms of infrastructure requirements, please.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the primary area assessment is done across the villages, but we're talking about Cleadon village here. We're talking about Cleadon Academy, which, if you look at the summary tables at the end of INV5, you'll see Cleadon Academy has no capacity. So we have a situation where the council is suggesting that children that would come to live on this development would either go to Whitburn or to West Bolden for their primary school education. It's just not practical. It will not happen. Therefore, the council needs to have greater consideration as to how it's going to plan for any population growth in its villages, in its communities, not trying to send children to other communities. The secondary level is a separate matter, and I accept that parental choice means that older children will travel by bus to the schools of their choice. But again, at the moment, we're only being presented with Bolden Secondary School as the potential area of operation. And secondly, on health, the council's evidence itself says that there is a deficit of 40 clinical rooms across the practices in this area. You know, we have a major situation, as we referred to yesterday, in terms of Bolden and the practices there, one of them closing to new patients at some time. It's all very well to say that the IDP is ongoing, and this will be a consultation with the ICB at a planning application stage, but we're talking about the exceptional circumstances of assessing whether these sites to be taken out of the Greenbelt, and as part of those considerations we need to have the infrastructure so people can be certain that they will be able to access these essential facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy next, please.
Yes, briefly, sir. Yeah, obviously, there's no doctor's surgery in Cleadon Village, so you're adding extra demand with no supply, if I've got that the right way round. Primary school, that could quickly become overloaded if it isn't already. Secondary schools, I've little comprehension, but obviously there are one or two around and about. But the main thing really is these are just policies, and There's no commitment for money. I appreciate you have these sort of Section 106 agreements and things, but there's such a lag on the provision that it is an issue to be considered. I think that's all I'll say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just reflecting on the question raised is the fact that there is no social utility infrastructure identified within the key considerations. It's the Commissioner's belief and agreement with the Council that these are sufficiently covered in other parts of the local plan and are not needed to be repeated at this stage, which could create confusion or double counting in these matters. So in that way it is effective, and obviously the evidence is supplied in the infrastructure delivery plan to support those policies, so it is justified.
Thank you. Mr. Clifford again, please.
Thank you, sir. Just to be absolutely clear, when we're talking about the area basis of analysis, we're not necessarily saying that where there's schools that could be extended, that's where children from this development would go. There's a management process. So in terms of managing the demand across the area, it could be that children from this development in the first instance, there will be more potentially in the immediate localised area. There will be, possibly children going to fill that capacity from elsewhere where the schools could be extended. So it's a kind of, it's an iterative process. It's not as simple sort of black and white that that's where there is capacity to extend, so that's where the children would go.
Thank you. Mr. Beattie, please.
I think it's worth saying that, or stressing that currently, as a resident, many of my current neighbours' children cannot go to school in Cleadon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. We haven't quite covered everything on the agenda for this morning. I was kind of hoping to structure it to kind of deal with Cleadon first and then Whitburn. I see Mr. Lavelle is here for Whitburn. My intention is to try and conclude the discussion on Cleadon today, so that may mean pushing Whitburn back slightly. Is there anybody else in the room who's affected by that? Mr. Dickinson, you're here already. So I'm going to try and conclude the Cleadon discussion. I was envisaging taking a short mid-morning break. I wonder if it's convenient to do that now, so we can have sort of 10-15 minute comfort break. We'll then come back. I'm going to budget no more than half an hour to conclude Cleadon, and then we'll move straight into Whitburn. So bear with us, Mr. Lavelle. So if we take a break now, it's just coming up to 11 o'clock. If we can be back in this room for 11:15, please, and then we'll conclude the Cleadon discussion. Okay, thank you everybody. It's just come up to 11:15, so I'm going to resume this hearing session. We're going to spend up to about half an hour further on Cleadon, and then I'm going to move on to the sites at Whitburn. So I'm on agenda item 7. Before I get on to that, Mr. Clifford, is that nameplate, is that a legacy from before the break? No, that's okay. Thank you. So under item 7, I'm trying to sort of bring together a number of issues that have been identified within the representations, and opportunity to briefly discuss these further. In terms of, obviously, an objective of the planning system is ultimately to result in well-designed places. There's obviously a clear theme in representations from the local community in terms of how this development could be successfully integrated in this part of Cleadon. Obviously, I've visited the site. There's housing sort of backing onto the site to the west and to the north. The council's obviously considered this as part of the site's framework documents in terms of how this site could come forward. It's indicative, it's not prescriptive, it's a guide at this stage for as evidence for plan making. And obviously the policy SP7 includes a number of kind of key considerations, particularly around sort of landscaping and setting back from the Sunderland Road frontage. Perhaps if I could invite the council at the first instance to just draw out, in response to my MIQ 560, how it's looked at the capacity of this site and potential opportunities to integrate the development into its setting, please.
Yeah, so as set out in the site frameworks document, there's an area to the south of the site where there's currently some surface water flood risk, and that's the frameworks sort of envisage that would be retained as green space and a drainage system, and that sort of, as you come up into the village, that would soften that impact on the gateway to the village. The key considerations for the site state that development should retain existing mature trees and ensure landscaping is an integral part of the design, which would also assist in integrating the development into the village setting.
Thank you for that. Now, obviously, I've had various kind of submissions before me, photographs. Obviously, this is a site that's in sort of, as Mr. Beattie's referred to, currently sort of arable farmland. Obviously, encroachment into countryside is part of green belt matters, which we discussed previously, but I think there's wider concern about just how you can sort of develop this site in a way that kind of would ultimately kind of feel part of Cleadon. Mr. Butler.
Thank you, sir. I think in contrast to site GA2 that we considered yesterday, we have here a clear constraint proposal within the indicative layout to, as Ms. Cooper has said, to not develop the southern quarter of the site, and that's clearly an area which has the most flood risk, which I assume we'll come back to at your next point. In terms of the intersection as well of that area with the wildlife corridor network as drawn is also an important constraint. So from those 2 points of view, clearly there are constraints there, and I'll draw attention to other constraints that you've referred to, particularly the noise from the A1018 and the need for substantial planting as a potential mitigation to that noise for any housing that would be fronting onto the 1018. And clearly as well, the type of development we have at West Meadows Road, which has a lot of mature trees in place, there's the need to try and also provide further tree planting to the west of the site. So all of those things, I think, are issues that can be still considered as constraints, and I would ask you to consider whether they are sufficient to enable the site to go forward.
Thank you. But in principle, Mr. Butler, I mean, just thinking about the character of this area, thinking about the kind of the tree belt woodland to the edge of the football academy, as you've referred to, there's kind of other woodland and trees this kind of edge of Cleadon. Would further tree planting, landscaping along particularly the A10-18 sort of boundary to the site, thinking about things like noise, would that be you know, hostile to the local character, or complementary, or fit in with the kind of the existing kind of framework?
I think in terms of well-designed places, additional tree planting is essential to any development, and to provide open space as well. And again, in contrast to GA2, we see a small area of open space being suggested at the centre of the site. You know, that could be you know, made into a more practical open space potentially in any development that if you were minded to allocate the site. So those issues, I think, you know, could temper the issue, but notwithstanding that, it's clear, and Mr. Beattie no doubt will explain that to you, that this is a cherished piece of the green belt at the edge of the village, and you know, people would not want to see it developed in principle.
Thank you. Mr. Beattie and then Mr. Duffy. We'll go in that order. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I just really wanted to read an extract from about the characteristics in relation to what Mr. Butler has just said about that particular area, that particular aspect of Cleadon. And it's an extract from a council publication, but it was part of a conservation management report. And what it says about that particular site is the rural edge along the eastern side of the village, that is Cleadon village, provides a glimpse of its historic setting with open fields, hedgerows and a belt of mature trees. And that is from a council publication. So I think that says it all. It is well regarded. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, please.
Yep. Obviously, my standpoint is this is the wrong site, but without prejudicing that particular standpoint, the local vernacular as you pass the site is one of glimpsed open agricultural fields, glimpsed through broken tree hedges and that type of thing. And there is talk about the planting, and there is talk about a buffer between the development and the houses immediately to the west of the site and the north of the site, although it's unclear what the dimension of that buffer is. And you know, if it was let's say 15 metres, it's probably far too little. If it's 30 metres, that would be ideal. Now I know that Stantec, who were previously working for the Church Commissioners, had submitted some viewpoints, and that was in respect of the buffer zones and things like that. And I'm sure that those would be an enhancement to what is currently on the table. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Mr. Dickinson, please. Mr. Duffy, no? No, okay, thank you. Mr. Dickinson, please.
Thank you. As Mr. Duffy has raised, as part of our representations, the commissioners have submitted a vision document which demonstrates how the site could be brought forward, which, as it's so aligned to the key considerations of the planning policy, to show that it is deliverable, achievable and sustainable. I'd also draw attention to the fact that the key considerations have 3 separate matters in regards to landscape as the first 3 bullet points, which is ensure the design and layout creates or enhances clear and defensible boundaries. We retain existing mature trees, which I think that even along to my right, we're all agreed is an important part of any master plan moving forward. And then ensure the landscaping is an integral part of the design, and making sure that development is set back from the eastern boundary. So all of those things being in the policy will ensure that they make their way into the formal application process. Just in terms of your question in integrating the development and some of the points that have been raised, obviously the site is 10.3 hectares, of which only 6.9 hectares are being proposed as developable area. That includes a buffer to the south as well, which is where integrated sustainable urban drainage is going to be located away from the flood risk zones. And obviously, moving forward as part of any application, because of the national requirements, there will be a high level of either design coding or design framework that will be supporting the planning application move forward.
Thank you. As you mentioned there, Mr. Dickinson, it's the second part of my point 7. I think the evidence does point to surface water issues on part of the site, and from the, as the council referred to earlier, when they've been looking at this, and the capacity of the site is to kind of avoid that area and to envelop it within kind of open space provision and to provide sustainable urban drainage systems. Obviously, there are other policies of the plan that will cover that. But from those representing the local community or local interests, is flood risk such an issue on this site that it's that would not be a justified approach, Mr. Butler?
Thank you, sir. The site framework document refers to the southwest corner of the site as a 1 in 100 years weather event. I think we're finding with climate change that these matters come around far more regularly. So there's no doubt that, and you know, the developers are not suggesting that they would do this, that part of the site would be suitable for development, and that's why this buffer zone is allocated. The issue about the remainder of the site and the issue of where surface water will be disposed, you know, is still a major problem. The field to the east of the 1018 was subject to a substantial flood alleviation scheme in recent years, and that, you know, has been partially effective, but you still see surface water flooding in that field as well. So it is difficult to know whether the whole site would be more affected, and also whether, in addition to the proposed SUDS area, any more detailed surface water retention would be needed, as we're seeing in sites being developed in East Boldham. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, please.
I'll put my microphone on this time, thank you. So it's odd that in recent years pluvial flooding has been an issue, more of an issue in that area. The site is characterised because it's effectively at the bottom of a huge catchment area, and the water's got very little place to go, which is why ponding in the field has to the south of the site has been more prevalent in recent years. Obviously, the development would include SUDS drainage, but if there's nowhere for the water to go, there's nowhere for the water to go. And in recent years, there's been a history of flooding. I think, from memory, the Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Service have been called out to historic flooding, although that may be from 2000. But there definitely are capacity issues. and the council have done a lot of work in refurbishing drainage from Cleadon village down to the bottom of West Meadows Road. In recent years, that's gone on. That's been a two-year project for them, and I can't but help think that that has been brought forward by the issues relating to surface water. The drainage probably doesn't benefit from the fact that a lot of it dates from 1902, when development in the area started, and a lot of the drainage is combined. So there's no separation between stormwater and foul water. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beattie, please. You might need to turn your microphone off, Mr. Duffy, to allow that one to work.
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to say that every year the houses that back onto the site, the rear gardens of the houses that back onto the site at the north end of the site flood in the winter. So that's a fact. And I'm also reliably informed that there are regular calls to the councillors about surface water flooding on Moor Lane and West Meadows Road, which continue despite the work that the drainage works that have been carried out over recent years. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for those submissions. If I move on, around enhancing biodiversity, I've read various representations around wildlife that's been observed on the site over the years, and the biodiversity value that people suggest that the site has. Obviously, policies of the plan will be seeking biodiversity net gain in line with national standards. When looking at the site and its ability to provide biodiversity net gain in relation to everything else that might be sought of it, is sufficient assurance or comfort at this stage that that can be accommodated? I'll invite Mr. Dickinson first and then bring in others. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the starting point would be to say that any planning application that does come forward will be supported with the sufficient evidence around ecology and habitat surveys that will need to be taken place as part of any planning application coming forward. Obviously, this is a landscape-led approach, and one of the key considerations is protecting the existing mature trees and hedgerows along the development boundary, which will be the kind of principal location of biodiversity value along the site, because of the fact that the field is an agricultural working field. There is, with sites such as these greenfield sites, it is not expected at this time that any off-site contribution towards biodiversity net gain will be sought, but this will be subject to the final design of the scheme coming forward and the appropriate biodiversity calculation and units calculation that will need to accompany the development, and any condition attached to a future planning application requiring it to demonstrate the requisite biodiversity net gain.
Can I just clarify with the council before I come to Mr. Butler? A number of sites I've been looking at are in the council's wildlife corridors. Is this another site that's in a wildlife corridor, please?
There is a small section to the southwest of the site which does fall within the wildlife corridor by virtue, again, of a buffer around an existing core site. And would I could obviously look back at the mapping, but immediately that strikes me that corridor would overlap with the area that's kind of proposed or anticipated for kind of open space or not to be developed on in any event. Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Butler, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think you've clarified in your own mind what's happening here. Last season was the first time in many years, in my experience, that the southern quarter of the site has been ploughed by the farmer. It's been the practice of the farmer to leave that part of the site in grassland for many years, and I think that's why when the assessment was done of the wildlife corridor, based as a buffer, which obviously is centred on Bolden Flats local wildlife area, that area did form part of the wildlife corridor network. So it is there. It's important, notwithstanding that this year it's got an arable crop on it, but nevertheless, the key considerations in our view are not sufficient in protecting the existing features, and therefore we would like to see them strengthened because of that presence of the wildlife corridor network there and its association with the core site nearby. And in view of that, there is the potential for you to retain that area of land in Greenbelt and see that it remains undeveloped. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy, please.
Yeah, just briefly, sir. Yeah, I take the point that Mr. Butler's made about the ploughing of an area that was I forget what the agricultural term is, but it was unploughed, remained unploughed for many years. There definitely is a wildlife element, and I think that if the development proceeded, that would get displaced because even the buffer zones wouldn't be able to accommodate it. There's pheasants, there's foxes, and there are
So I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. No doubt that the council is seeking, is it 30% affordable housing on this site. Obviously that's been subject to local plan viability, local plan wide viability assessment. Are there other types of housing? Were this allocation to be found sound in principle? Does the policy need to be modified to cover other types of housing that should be delivered on this site? Mr. Butler.
Thank you, sir. As you heard in evidence in relation to site GA2 yesterday, we draw your attention to the strategic housing market assessment and the overall need for housing for older people, and therefore if this site was allocated, then there's a potential for that. And clearly, in terms of our commentary yesterday, we fully support the 30% affordable mix. And if you look at the viability study, you see the profit level there of over £12 million. And we believe that it's more than affordable to have that type of mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson.
I would just concur with what's been. Apologies. I would just concur with what's been raised. That as part of the statement of common ground, policy 18 is flagged as being an agreement that we would achieve 30% affordable housing as it currently stands on the site. In terms of providing a mix, the policy doesn't currently, to my knowledge, define the specific type of housing that's coming forward, and retaining that flexibility will be essential to ensuring that opportunities for other types of housing can come forward and can be brought forward by the market.
Thank you. Mr. Beattie, please.
Yeah, just on the point of the type of housing, I'd just like to say that it's generally felt that the developers, irrespective of what's planned, will be very commercially focused and likely to build executive type housing, family type housing on that site.
Thank you. Obviously, I'll have in mind there are various policies of the plan that would apply to all developments, so I've got those in mind as well. Thank you. I'm going to come on to the last item for Cleadon. It's around delivery timeframes. It's to help my understanding when I'm looking at the overall picture of when housing could be delivered within the borough. Obviously, the council had looked at this as part of the strategic housing land availability assessments and had provided a build-out rate, or an anticipated build-out rate, at table 10 of the council's proof of evidence. The trajectory that's now in the statement of common ground is slightly different. We've got a number of factors to consider here, Mr. Dickinson, and then invite the council as well. Obviously, there's a process of plan adoption still to go through. Then there'll be either further survey work. We've already referred to another year's WADA survey material. Then a submission of a planning application, whether that'll be an outline or full detailed scheme for this site, notwithstanding also, I take it the church commissioners do not build directly, so there'll be a disposal process. Even if the council was minded to approve a scheme, it's likely to be subject to Section 106 contributions, etc., discharge of conditions. You can see where I'm going with this, Mr. Dickinson. Then development on site. So is first completions of now 59 units by 31st of March 2029 realistic?
The site is a greenfield site, accessible already by 2 major highways. There are no immediate infrastructure requirements that would need to be delivered ahead of time that would to make the scheme acceptable beyond mitigating its potential impact. Obviously, work is ongoing alongside the local plan to ensure that our own evidence base for any future planning application is supported robustly. Obviously, the key issue here is that if a planning application is submitted now, it would not benefit from the allocation and would be in the green belt. So the allocation would need to be adopted before any decision is made on the planning application. Looking at the build-out rate, 50 homes, 59 leading into 50 units a year is a very standard delivery rate, which I think is upheld in various industry reports, such as the Litchfield build-out report. So I don't believe that there should be much concern about the delivery rate from the point of starting. So at this moment in time, I believe it's entirely reasonable, given that we have proposed in the vision document a policy compliant scheme, why a straightforward planning application process couldn't be achieved. And hence why the statement of common ground has the trajectory included within it.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, please.
Thank you, sir. Residents will undoubtedly be concerned about the length of construction period, whether it is indeed reduced to 5 years, I think you're suggesting perhaps that that's a likelihood that may not be achievable. The indicative layout, as I spoke to earlier, it proposes 2 entry points to the site from the 1018, and clearly traffic management arrangements will be required on this very busy road to carry out the construction, so that there are real issues about the length of the construction period. But I'm pleased to hear the representative church commissioners say that the allocation would need to be adopted before any decision on a planning application, because that's not what we heard yesterday relating to site GA2. So I'm pleased about that.
Thank you, Mr. Beattie, and then Mr. Duffy, and then we'll probably bring this session to a conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, just very briefly, I said before, the SLA was carried out in 2016, so we've been living with this since 2016 as a resident, and residents, not myself, generally. So we're now talking about commencing 2028, 29, 5 years worth of development, so that takes us to 2034. That's a long time. I'll probably be dead. I mean, it's unacceptable. It's a ridiculous amount of time to have to wait and have this hanging over us. In addition to the upset and the upheaval and the building work and the noise and everything else that's going on, I mean, just having it there in your background all the time ruined people's retirement. But I think I've probably said enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy, please.
Yeah, just shortly. So obviously the development will be governed by the construction phase of the development will be governed by the Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. My issue isn't so much with the delivery or safe delivery, but really with the sequencing. And often on developments we see the housing brought forward first, and then the things that nobody really wanted to do follow on afterwards. Personally, if the development proceeds, my preference would be that the buffer zones are prioritised in terms of the planting on the fringes, so that they have a time, they have the 5 years to mature rather than being delivered right at the end. That was my point. Thank you.
Thank you. If I just turn briefly to the council, I appreciate as part of the key considerations there isn't something in relation to phasing or master planning as part of this policy. But for the benefit of this hearing session, are there other policies in relation to design, implementation within the plan that would speak to some of the kind of issues which I'm hearing this morning, which perhaps more relate to the planning application stage rather than the principle of the allocation?
Yes, so obviously we have policies in the plan which relate to the delivery of infrastructure, which will be applicable to this plan application should it come forward.
Thank you. The general, I should be able to recall all this, but the mind is failing me. But again, similarly, people get concerned about things around like delivery of affordable housing. Again, of the policies that help assist around the timing of that, in terms of any kind of phasing conditions about when you'd expect to see the mix of housing coming forward.
Obviously, there are policies around providing a mix of housing and affordable housing, but it doesn't necessarily touch on the phasing of that.
Thank you.
So can I just draw your attention in that context to policy 47, design principles, which provide a very extensive and comprehensive list of material considerations which need to be taken into account development management stage.
Thank you. I'm going to draw a line now under the Cleadon session. Thank you everybody for your contributions for that. We're going to have a change of seats. Mr. Lavell's patiently been waiting. Should we just have a short break for a couple of minutes, allow Cleadon to leave and Mr. Lavelle to come in? Thank you. I think everybody's here now for the session on Whitburn. I'm not going to reintroduce myself or ask people to reintroduce themselves, other than obviously Mr. Lavelle, you're joining us on behalf of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum, and I appreciate I saw you at earlier sessions of the plan examination. My original timetable, which I've not stuck to, was to hopefully sort of conclude this by 1 o'clock today, with a potential that we might go on into the early afternoon, but I appreciate people may have other commitments or obligations. Mr. Dickinson, I appreciate you here on behalf, is it site GA6, is that the Church Commissioner's interest?
That is correct, yes.
Mr. Lavelle, have you got any kind of particular time constraints I need to be aware of?
I did promise the wife I'd pick her up at 1:30.
Okay. Well, we'll see how we get on. If there's a number of ways we can deal with this. As we're trying to run them as discussions, that's one way. But ultimately, it's a right to be heard. So if you felt, Mr. Lavelle, well, this is what I want to say, that's me covered, and then I'll exit stage left. I've said my piece. We can do it that way, or we can see how we get on with the discussion and how long it takes.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you, and I see the council's team has remained the same from...
We're in your hands entirely. Our personal agendas are not matters of concern to you.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking also for recordings, there's no new people at this moment in time to introduce. Okay. So obviously here for sites GA5, GA6 to the at the northern edge of Whitburn. I outlined in my matters, issues and questions, I've obviously tried to deal with things in what I thought was a reasonable kind of sequence. So as various parts of the discussion, on day one we looked at the habitat regulations in more general terms. On day two we looked at the kind of general spatial strategy, and I appreciate the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum made representations also from Mr. Latimer in relation to that. I've tried through the sort of just covering notes on the agenda to kind of see where I saw things being picked up. So we have looked at the sewage treatment and sewage network capacity in broad terms as part of Matter 3, but we will come back to that, I'm sure, Mr. Lavelle, very briefly on as part of this discussion. I've also just put a note there to everybody involved in the examination. I am aware, people have made the examination aware that there has been a decision on the Whitburn Lodge site, which forms part of GA5, and that's subject to a planning appeal, which remains to be determined. Just to make things absolutely distinct, I am just focusing on the local plan and what's in the local plan. I'm not dealing with the appeal. I have no connection to the appeal or what's happening in terms of that separate process. But obviously if it outputs or there's a decision within the time frame of this examination, then that may be material to this process. So I just wanted to make that clear. We need to focus at this stage on what's in the local plan, and in the case of today, policy SP7 and sites GA5 and GA6. So if I could like to start first, it was item 2 on my agenda, and it is kind of coming back to the water sewage issue. I'd just like to understand, Mr. Lavelle, in terms of the position of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum, in terms of your hearing statement, potential changes that you say the plan could be made sound after Northumbrian Water has fully complied with its formal undertakings. Just so I'm clear from you, is that when it's implemented what was in the Ofwat report?
Can I introduce myself again, because there's people here, like the Church Commissioners, who don't know who I am or what I'm about. My name's Steve Lavelle, and I'm the elected Vice Chair of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum. The Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum was initially designated in January 2017. So we've been working a long time on this. It was later redesignated in 2022. The forum was established to allow the local community to participate in the neighbourhood planning activities within the Whitburn area of South Tyneside, and has a formal and legally recognised status within the planning process. The Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan was formally adopted by South Tyneside Council's Cabinet on September the 7th, 2022. This followed a community referendum where the plan received overwhelming support. The Whitburn Forum are pleased that Matter 3 Special Strategy will look at the issue of whether the principle of further housing growth within the catchment of Whitburn sewage network and Hendon treatment works is acceptable, or whether there are any timing implications. The proposed South Tyneside local plan deals with disposal of foul water and protecting water quality at policies 10 and 11 respectively. Whitburn Forum will engage with the Stage 2 hearings to argue that these policies are unsound, as they are not based on a robust and credible evidence base. I'll move on to policy SP7, which is mentioned in the Statement of Common Ground. The examination is focused on what is in the proposed local plan and whether what is set out in policy SP7 for GA5 and GA6 is sound. A key consideration in policy SP7 urban and village growth areas is that it will have regard to the Whitburn Village Neighbourhood Plan. The examination is informed that policy WNP12, sewage policy, in the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan already forms part of the development plan. This is the policy. Planning proposals will not be supported unless it can be shown by rigorous analysis that there is sufficient capacity in the local sewerage system and that any new connections will not increase the risk of system back up flooding or cause any adverse impact to the neighbourhood area environment. The forum that I represent believes that the sewage policy in the Whitburn neighbourhood plan is regarded by the council officers as part of the development plan on paper only. A sewage system uses pipes to collect and take rain, wastewater and trade water for treatment and disposal. It can be shown that in practice, the officers from the council choose not to look for the rigorous analysis that there is sufficient capacity in the local sewage system. They choose to focus only on wastewater treatment works, treatment capacity, to justify their recommendations. They ignore sufficiency in the sewage system. Had they complied with the sewage policy and sought the rigorous analysis the policy requires, they would have uncovered the fact that over 1 million tonnes of untreated sewage was discharged into the environment from the sewage system at Whitburn in 2023. Such large volumes must cause an adverse effect to the Whitburn neighbourhood area environment. Policy SP7 is not sound as it does not meet objectively assessed requirements with respect to the sewage infrastructure requirements for the Whitburn neighbourhood area. The examination asks for clarification of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum hearing statement and potential changes to the plan they would like to see recommended. I would comment on the evidence presented to the examination to date in order to clarify the Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum hearing statement. Last week, the Inspector, your good self, asked the officers, Mr Clifford, present if there was anything in the Ofwat decision notice that would alter their position and arrive at an alternative conclusion. The council officers confirmed that the position of the council has not altered. They regard the issues raised in the Ofwat report are one of compliance for Northumbrian Water to address rather than the planning system. The reply to the question about the position of the council raises concern for the forum. I am aware that local plan examination is not looking at the detail of the planning application scheme for the Whitburn Lodge, GA5. However, above the detail, there are aspects regarding the stated position of the council in the application for the Whitburn Lodge that the forum regard as significant conflict to the evidence presented to the local plan examination. The declaration that nothing in the Ofwat decision has altered the council's position is at odds with the council's reason for refusing the Whitburn Lodge planning application, which is referred to in post sub 34, Statement of Common Ground, South Tyneside Council and Lovell. I quote the reasons. Planning Committee considered that by virtue of increased drainage discharges from the proposed development into a combined sewer system whose performance was already a concern to regulators, puts into question whether the pollution control regime governing the handling of wastewater is operating effectively in the locality surrounding the appeal site. Consequently, Planning Committee considered that the assumption in paragraph 201 of the National Planning Policy Framework cannot be relied upon in this instance. It goes on to say, furthermore, in addition to the development not being in accordance with NPPF paragraph 187, the proposals are also considered to be contrary to the development plan policies within the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan, WNP, and the Council's adopted Local Development Framework, LDF. Planning Committee, in reaching their decision, are entitled to give differing weight to the relevant planning considerations as compared to the officers' report, and in consequence reach a different decision to that recommended by officers. That was the case here. The Planning Committee gave far greater weight in the exercise of their assessment and determination of the planning application and relative to what was set out in the officer assessment to the above-mentioned matters, namely foul drainage impacts, including concerns raised by Ofwat and the Office for Environmental Protection and to objections concerning foul drainage in the representations received in relation to the proposal as summarised in the committee reports. Planning Committee considered that harm would arise to both human health and biodiversity from the proposed development by virtue of the increased risk to the environment from the increased drainage discharges that the development would generate to a sewage system in respect of which Ofwat have already raised concerns regarding non-compliance with the urban wastewater treatment regulations. Having regard to such harm, and given the concerns raised by Ofwat and the Office for Environmental Protection, it cannot be assumed that the pollution control regime governing the handling of wastewater is operating effectively as set out in paragraph 201 of the NPPF. Planning Committee therefore determined that the development was contrary to paragraph 187 of the NPPF, policies WNP1, WNP5 and WNP12 of the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan. Policies EA3 and EA5 of the South Tyneside LDF Core Strategy, Policy DM7 of the South Tyneside LDF Development Management Policies, DPD, and Policies SP1, 13, 11, SP21 and 34 of the Publication Draft South Tyneside Plan. The planning officers in their recommendations chose to discount the evidence of Ofwat and deemed the evidence presented by Northumbrian Water to be more credible and persuasive enough to influence their recommendations. By the way, sir, it's all on the website, South Tyneside website, the reasons for refusal. The council, that is the elected officials, however, regarded the issue raised in the Ofwat report are significant enough to be addressed in the planning system. The council gave more weight to evidence supplied to them from Ofwat than the weight they gave to assurances provided by Northumbrian Water. This is at odds with the council officer's statement that the position of the council has not altered. The Whitburn Forum have discussed their concerns and submitted evidence to these same officers of South Tyneside Council for over 7 years, demonstrating that sewage pollution at Whitburn is a significant issue and that Northumbrian Water were in breach of the urban wastewater treatment regulations with respect to the Hendon-Whitburn sewage system. Our concerns have not been given due regard, and our evidence did not prevail with the officers of the council. Our evidence was also submitted to the regulator Ofwat and was accepted, contributing to the Ofwat decision notice. Last week, the inquiry was informed that in terms of wastewater infrastructure, capacity and sufficiency, the council is led by the evidence that prevails and the guidance of the statutory undertaker. I suggest it is the council officers that are led by the guidance of Northumbrian Water rather than the elected officials, that is the council. The council is entitled to give differing weight to the relevant planning considerations and compare to the officer recommendations and have done so. Northumbrian Water, as a statutory undertaker, have failed in their statutory duties and should not be considered or regarded as a credible consultee. Last week at this examination, Northumbrian Water would have you believe that the Water Industry Act sits outside of planning matters. The Environment Act 2021 includes provisions that make drainage and wastewater management plans a statutory part of the planning process, highlighting the link between the Water Industry Act and the wider planning environment. Following the the wider planning frameworks. Following the commencement of Section 79 of the Environment Act 2021, it's a statutory requirement under Section 94A of the Water Industry Act 1991 for sewage undertakers to prepare, publish and maintain a drainage and sewage management plan, hereinafter called a Drainage and Water or DWMP. The latest DWMP produced by Northumbrian Water is big on promises to reduce storm overflows, but contains no details whatsoever of how this will be achieved. Mr. Murray from Northumbrian Water claimed that the Hendon-Whitburn system was operating within its permit conditions. This is not the case. The findings of Ofwat, accepted by Northumbrian Water, by the way, these are findings, not allegations, as the council officers point out, show that the Hendon sewage treatment works is breaching the urban wastewater treatment regulations. It is a condition of the Hendon discharge permit that the sewage treatment works is operated in compliance with the urban wastewater treatment regulations. Mr. Wharton denied that Northumbrian Water had constructed an illegal connection to the Whitburn sewage system. I have the warning letter and compliance assessment report sent by the EA in May 2021 to Northumbrian Water, which gives the details of this illegal connection and identifies the permit breach. The compliance assessment report 0744090, to my knowledge, remains in the public register. Mr. Latimer explained how condition 8 of the Hendon permit has never been complied with. The Environment Agency do not agree, but my research indicates that the EA's understanding of the Hendon sewage treatment works operating system is incorrect, and the EA's interpretation of the inspector's report in October 2001 to inquire into discharges from Whitburn Steel Pumping Station and from Hendon sewage treatment works is flawed. I agree with Mr. Latimer. It's also a condition of the Hendon discharge permit that the EA are supplied annually with data of the combined sewer overflow discharges from the 310 metre overflow, as opposed to the 1.5 kilometre overflow that Northumbrian Water indicated offward. In 2020, Northumbrian Water supplied this data to the EA, which claimed there had been 27 discharges amounting to 15 hours and 52 minutes that year. I challenge this. Northumbrian Water amended the data and increased their figure to 178 discharges, amounting to 636 hours, an increase of 4,000%. The EA accepted this new figure, but took no further action for this technical breach of permit. Northumbrian Water say for the urban wastewater treatment regulations, Ofwat are not the regulator, the Environment Agency is. The Ofwat decision notice clearly identifies Northumbrian Water's failings and how these have occurred. The failings relate to the management, operation, maintenance and performance of its wastewater treatment works and the collecting systems, that's the sewer networks that flow to them. There's a whole section devoted to the Hendon Whitburn sewage system, and Northumbrian Water have accepted these findings. The EA have confirmed that if another authority say Northumbrian Water is in breach of the urban wastewater treatment regulations and are taking enforcement action, the EA would not take enforcement action over the same breach of legislation. This is the case with the Ofwat decision notice regarding the Hendon Whitburn sewage system. I'll move on to what you asked for, how to make the plan sound.
Thank you.
This is it. The plan could be made sound after Northumbrian Water has fully complied with its formal undertakings under Section 19 of the Water Industry Act of 91 that will see it commit to investing an additional £15.7 million to minimise spills beyond compliance and improve the natural environment in the operating area. As per the Ofwat decision notice, the following undertaking is required to be completed as a minimum before policy SP7 can be considered as sound. A fresh analysis of potential options is required for reducing both the frequency and the volume of spills from the Whitburn-Hendon system, including ensuring that it is using a robust model for assessing resultant harm, which takes into account of tidal patterns in the area and which considers the operation of the system as a whole. These undertakings include adhering to the government's storm overflows discharge reduction plan, which seek to reduce spills from Northumbrian Water storm overflows to 10 per year, whilst employing best technical knowledge, not exceeding excessive cost. As a result of the 2012 ECJ judgment, an improvement scheme employing best technical knowledge, not exceeding excessive cost, to reduce the spills at Whitburn was completed in 2017. After 5 years, it became apparent to the forum that the scheme had failed. The EA insisted it needed 10 years of statistical data to evaluate the scheme's effectiveness. Ofwat, DEFRA, and the EA now confirm that the scheme has failed. Using this methodology, the Forum would like to see the fresh analysis of options undertaken and work commenced to reduce spills from the Whitburn long sea outfall to 10 per year, whilst employing best technical knowledge, not entailing excessive cost. After this work is completed, the Forum expect 10 years of statistical data to be obtained to evaluate the scheme's effectiveness before considering supporting planning applications. The allocation of the proposed 730 homes in GA4, GA5, GA6 and GA7 is likely, due to urban creep, to introduce extra volumes of surface water in the combined sewage network. Irrespective of any mitigation of surface water flows being mitigated by SUDs, etc., the proposed 730 homes, according to water industry calculations, will generate an extra 96,000 tonnes of foul sewage flows from areas where there are presently zero flows. If after 10 years spills are reduced to 10 per year at Whitburn, the Forum will support planning applications for medium-scale developments of between 10 and 49 houses as proposed in GA5 and GA6. If there is no solution whilst employing best technical knowledge not entailing excessive cost, the Forum will not support planning proposals in the neighbourhood area and will object to planning proposals in the GA3 and GA4 areas that are bigger than small scale of 1 to 9 dwellings in order to support their campaign to stop sewage pollution at Whitburn. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of, I'm sorry, I just do need to come back and be clear on what the Forum is seeking as part of this plan. I appreciate there is a separate planning application process. Just unclear, Mr. Lavelle, in terms of what you're seeing or how I understand where you ultimately brought us to. I think what you're saying to me is that by the time Northumbrian Water have come up with a solution in terms of best, it's the BTN KEEC, not exceeding excessive cost. Then the 10 years further monitoring data. I think what you're saying to me is, from the Forum's perspective, no developments or none of these housing sites should be considered for development within this plan period, because that would probably be taking us towards the end of the plan period.
That's great. Obviously, you'll have seen the timescales in the Ofwat decision notice, and they're talking about having the analysis done by December 2025, which obviously gives some light at the end of the tunnel. But if you want to play on a fair and open playing field, we have been shouting from the rooftops that the 2017 scheme, which was the cheapest option Northumbrian Water could choose, because I've seen the different options, we could see immediately that was failing when we were having hit 890,000 tonnes of sewage discharge, 1 million tonnes of sewage discharge, 997,000 tonnes of sewage discharge. So all the time, there was a lot of resistance from all the authorities that we had to wait 10 years from 2017. So to be fair, let's assess what work's got to be done, let's do the work, and let's assess it after 10 years.
Thank you. I'm mindful we had quite a bit of discussion on this as part of Matter 3 last week. The Council gave me its view at that point. Is there anything further it wishes to add in light of what I heard? We're talking specifically about sites GA5 and GA6.
So no, not making light of the points Mr. Lavelle is sincerely making on behalf of the group he represents. There's nothing we can really add to the discussion which has already taken place. We are assured by the statutory undertaker that there is adequate capacity in the system to accommodate local plan growth. Whatever obligations it's under to Ofwat in terms of undertakings, that is a question for it and its licensing and the way it conducts its operation. But there is nothing in that process which would prevent or should prevent these allocations being made, on the assumption that the statutory undertaker will act within the law and that its assurances given to you personally at this examination are sound.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's definitely a matter for me to go away and deliberate on, but that's useful, helpful to me, Mr. Lavelle, in terms of what the forum's statement was driving at in relation to that part that I identified at paragraph 2. Okay, I'm going to move on in terms of the agenda. Coming on to proposed alteration to the Greenbelt boundary. Obviously, both the Whitburn Lodge site, treating it as an allocation for the purposes of this plan examination, and the adjoining land to the north of Shearwater are currently both within the Greenbelt. If I can understand, please, first from the council, as the starting point, as I've identified at various other sites, the council's approach to the Greenbelt, how it's looked at this particular parcel, which I think is WH1, to the north of the village, and then what kind of offsetting or compensatory improvements have been identified through that Greenbelt review work, please.
Yes, so the site, both sites, both GA5 and GA6, were considered within the wider parcel WH1 within the Greenbelt review. That was WH1 itself is a wider parcel that has been assessed, which also included field parcels adjacent to the proposed allocations on the other side of the road. Within table 4.3 within the Greenbelt study, it shows that all the parcels within that wider WH1 parcel, which was assessed, scored a moderate assessment in terms of harm. Again, as with the other sites, a more detailed assessment of the sites GA5 and GA6 is set out within Appendix C of the document, which specifically identifies that both sites have a moderate rating against purpose 1, 2 and 3, and then a low assessment against purpose 4. In terms of offsetting, once again, that's been informed by the Greenbelt review appendices and also the site frameworks document. Key points which have been carried through into the key considerations include the retention of trees and the creation of defensible boundaries, and obviously notwithstanding earlier conversations that we've had about compensatory measures for these sites.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Lavelle, if you want to speak to the kind of the forum's position. I appreciate we're dealing with kind of two sites here in one, so it's kind of Whitburn Lodge first, and then the parcel of land between Whitburn Lodge and Shearwater, or the approach into Shearwater.
Sorry to have to do this, but just to comment on assurance given by Northumbrian Water, to go back to that point. Northumbrian Water made a big say and give figures about Howden and how they were going to improve things in terms of smart flow, etc. What I'd say is it's very limited what they can do in Hendon, because a simple look on Google Maps shows that Hendon wastewater treatment works, which has no storm overflow tanks, is landlocked. To the north, it's got Hudson Dock. To the east, it's got the North Sea. To the west, it's got a major train line, and to the south, it's got Hendon Beach. Just going back to their assurances that they were going to sort them out, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and I'd like to be engaged, the forum would like to be engaged with both Northumbrian Water, the EA, and Ofwat with regard to that. In terms of the discussion at this moment in time, we have no further comments to make apart from what we've already entered at Regulation 18 and 19.
Thank you. Just so I understand from that, Mr. Lavelle, I don't know if this is your area within the forum. The way I read it was there's perhaps an understanding around the Whitburn Lodge site that something needs to be potentially done there, or that the public, when you've kind of engaged them through neighbourhood planning kind of processes, want to see something, or want to see the site improved. Put it bluntly, but the concern is more around the site GA6.
Yes, the GA6. I don't know if it's part of this. I think it's the next one. Is it the GA6 one? Is of concern because it represents a wildlife corridor, etc. You know, well, it will be blocked off, physically blocked off. And GA5, we have worked extensively with developers, with Lovell, over many years for them to develop that site. And again, the stumbling block there became the wastewater issue.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. If I move on from Greenbelt to item 4, obviously this is a site that's particularly close to particularly the Durham Coast special area of conservation. It's also, I think if I recall, it's approximately about 400 metres from the special area of conservation. We discussed this briefly on day 1 when looking at the habitat regulation assessment. And I believe it's also a site that will also need to be, I presume this is in relation to GA6, a site that will need to be subject to an additional year's monitoring as part of the wading birds survey work. In terms of the proximity to the special area of conservation, I think the habitat regulation assessment has drilled down into a further level of appropriate assessment and concluded that there are a conclusion of no likely significant effects, so no adverse effects on the qualifying features of either both the SAC or the special area protection area can be arrived at. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'd just sort of like to reiterate the points that were made by Ms Rawcliffe on day 1 in terms of urban edge effects and the Durham SAC. The qualifying features for the Durham SAC is vegetated sea glyphs, so it's a very specific habitat that is designated as part of this, as part of the Durham Coast SAC. Obviously, the site itself, the proposed allocation is 400 metres away from that, and between that there is a significant area of the Whitburn Coastal Park, which acts as a buffer in terms of the development area and the vegetation on the sea cliffs. As Ms Rawcliffe pointed out last week, the potential risk in terms of urban edge effects to this are quite limited because of the limited amount of development on the cliffs. We've also identified that on the coast there's 2 locations where there are noted to be urban edge effects in the SAC survey report, document NAT 3, and neither of those are adjacent to the area where the proposed allocations are. So again, I think in terms of these allocations, the likelihood of urban edge effects affecting the Durham Coast SAC is quite limited because of the proximity from the actual vegetated cliffs and due to that buffer area behind in terms of the Whitburn Coastal Park.
Yeah, we accept a lot of what Mrs Lamb says in terms of it being removed and the people. I think Ms Rawcliffe mentioned last week that the fly tipping, etc., wouldn't be an issue as it is somewhere further down. Obviously, there's more than the SAC in terms of protected areas there, and we have discussed at length the HR area, shall we say. And I'd just like to comment on the comment made by Mrs Rawcliffe, which I had to look up. Yeah, she mentioned a study by Butler and Goddard, and she says about sewage is a food for birds. And when you treat the sewage, the bird populations decrease. I've looked at that study, sir, and I think it was conducted up in Amble. But the amazing thing about it was commissioned by Northumbrian Water. And you know my opinion of Northumbrian Water. And also, it doesn't have a definitive conclusion, so it just strongly suggests.
Thank you. I think if I recall, one of the action points for the council from the habitat regulation assessment session was linked to look again at that kind of part of the habitat regulation assessment and whether there's further kind of detail or further material that the assessment wanted to conclude on, because I think I made a note myself that study referred to by Miss Rawcliffe is not in the bibliography for the habitat regulation assessment, so it may be something that adds to the evidence base. Thank you. And similarly, in terms of, we discussed the wading bird survey in relation just previously to the site in Cleadon. It's not a preclusion to development taking place. It's just to further establish the baseline from whatever kind of mitigation might be required from that site.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a similar situation as what we discussed this morning in terms it would be there to provide a more robust understanding of how the wading birds in the area use the site.
Thank you. And moving on to item 5 of the agenda, this is in relation to both sites. Again, come back to kind of greenbelt alterations, but just in terms of securing sustainable development more generally. I asked the question, it was part of my MIQs, whether these sites, this general location is well related to facilities in Whitburn and well served by public transport. I mean, it's obviously very much at the northern tip of the village. Should I be concerned about that, Mr. Clifford?
Thank you, sir. We consider the site to be well related to facilities in Whitburn and well served by public transport, and that there would be a genuine choice of transport modes. So firstly, in terms of bus stops, the site is close to bus stops with a number of bus routes passing the site directly. So there are 2 direct services on the A183 Coast Road. Those are the E1 and E2, directly opposite the site, with the E6 operating on Lizard Lane. These services provide half-hour connectivity to Sunderland and South Shields, and also to Whitburn Local Centre. And I'll come to Whitburn Local Centre shortly. Table 11 of the Council's response to MIQ 5.66 provides details of bus services. In terms of active travel opportunities, as was mentioned earlier, the Council has an adopted local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, and Appendix 8 active travel routes and local plan housing allocations in the infrastructure delivery plan shows the site is next to a proposed active travel route. The site is just over 400 metres away from the nearest convenience store. The nearest doctor's surgery is just over 1 kilometre away. That can also be accessed by bus services that pass the site. I referenced Whitburn Local Centre. That's identified in the neighbourhood plan as well as the local plan. And in terms of the evidence for the local plan, the retail study that I mentioned earlier, the neighbourhood commentary, considered it to be a highly vital and viable local centre, providing very well to meet the needs of local residents. In terms of school provision, the nearest primary school is Marsden Primary School, which is less than 200 metres from the site. And the nearest secondary school, Whitburn Academy, is 1.1 miles from the site. And that is accessible via 2 of the bus routes that pass the site. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Lavelle, is there anything you want to add in terms
yeah,
of...
you're quite right, Mr. Clifford. There's 2 buses. There's the E1 and the E2 that go from Shields to Sunderland backwards and forwards every half hour. In terms of links elsewhere, we are very much at the northern tip of Whitburn. We're also miles away from the nearest metro. So if people don't want to work in Sunderland or Shields, they've got to then get the car to travel further afield or catch buses, etc. The sites themselves are about a mile away from the centre of Whitburn, you know yourself. And we were in discussions with the owners, and we introduced various housing associations and people that build old people's homes, and McCarthy and Stone, etc., were not interested in the site. They said it was far too far away for old people. There wasn't enough services around there, and they wouldn't even consider it, because we thought that would be viable, you know, for the site itself at GA5, so they wouldn't consider it. Mr. Clifford did mention the doctor's surgery, which is a mile away. You know, you'd have to catch a bus, but through no fault of the council, the dentist is now situated at Southwick, which means 2 buses for the old people. So that causes a great deal of concern in terms of how to get there. I've actually just been there this morning. It's a riverside down at Southwick. So that's a concern for the dentist, you know. I'll not touch upon the school situation, because I think Marsden Primary School is a fantastic school, and I think the ebb and flow of population, I don't think, there's no concern from my perspective. But what I would say overall, and I think it's been touched upon at Cleadon and Bolton, is it very much will become, if you look at those pockets of land, a small commuting community. There's no two ways about it. The people will have to travel by cars to get wherever they want, and especially to get the places of work, you know, which will obviously add to the bottlenecks here and there. It's sometimes a nightmare to get out to Whitburn on the morning to the village centre.
Thank you. But I mean, there are bus stops near the site, Mr. Lavelle?
Yeah, there's bus stops. There's bus stops outside the Whitburn Lodge, and there's a bus stop outside of Shearwater, and there's a bus stop just opposite, so that's easy within walking distance.
And just for my benefit, we've discussed both this morning at Cleadon and also at Bolton yesterday, Area 6 primary school provision, and there's reference to Whitburn. Is Whitburn for a primary school the same as Marsden? Is the one school, or are there two separate schools?
They're separate schools.
So there's 2 primary schools.
Yes.
Within, yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 6 on my agenda is around, again, I've taken a similar approach as I took to Cleadon in terms of ultimately achieving a well-designed place. I think from the forums, mainly through your original representations on the plan back in 2024, less so your hearing statement, I think concern about the relationship, particularly site GA6, the coastal park and the wildlife corridor. I can turn to the council first before I come to Mr. Lavelle. So this is both of these sites wholly within a wildlife corridor.
Appendix B of the wildlife corridor map obviously shows the extent of the wildlife corridors on South Tyneside. GA6 does wholly fall within the wildlife corridor, whereas GA5 has been sort of cut out as part of the methodology of the review document, was to remove built development from the wildlife corridors.
Thank you. And in terms of the proposed boundaries of the site, it's quite, it seems clear to me on the ground there's no sort of overlap with the coastal park. It will butt up to the edge of the coastal park, but there's no sort of issue of overlap or so that's not a particular, potentially a particular issue. In terms of the wildlife corridors, I think as I've heard at other sessions, obviously this is something to respond to and reflect, reflect on, and kind of when considering a detailed proposal, it's not necessarily a barrier to development. But Mr. Lavelle, from the forum's perspective, because I think you had concerns about the impact on the wildlife corridor.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Lamb has covered it, in as much as GA5's been built on for years, you know, Whitburn Lodge and previous things, but GA6 is obviously, if you're built on that, it would shut the door, you know, because you have GA5, and then you have the houses across the street there, so you've got all of that closes off the corridor, and you've got a small parcel of land, GA6, which is the open part of the corridor, and then you've got Shearwater starting at the very end, so you'd have a whole building line stretching for half a mile or more, where the wildlife corridor would no longer exist in that particular area. So there are concerns about that.
I mean, what is the corridor intending to do at this point? Is it to kind of allow passage or connection through from the coast for particular species through to, you know, more open farmland to the west?
Unfortunately, I don't know the specifics in terms of the species and how they would use that corridor. If further information is required, I'm sure I'll be able to liaise with Ms Rawcliffe to provide more information.
Thank you. I'll bring in Mr Dickinson, please.
Thank you. Again, I felt that question was directed at the council, that's why I put my name card down. But in specific comments to the corridor being shut off, obviously in our representations we have submitted indicative feasibility layouts which do show green and blue infrastructure integrated into the layout, including a southern boundary, including a southern buffer zone within the site, and it is obviously the intention of the applicant to demonstrate biodiversity net gain in line with the policies and to also act on the key considerations which are within the statement of common ground, which obviously includes retaining existing and mature trees and ensure landscape is an integral part of the design. And the feasibility layout shows a policy compliance scheme across all of those matters.
Move on, but just, Mr Lavelle, is there anything further on that point? Are you happy we've covered?
Yeah, I don't understand how he's talking about the southern border, because if you close the corridor off, you close the corridor off. We're not talking about digging a tunnel or anything, are we?
I think it's in terms of the detailed layout of the site. If this was put forward, if this does go forward as an allocation, there'll obviously then be subsequently a planning application. There are key considerations obviously set out in the policy. I'll obviously reflect on whether they're sufficient, whether there needs to be more content on that. I think what Mr Dickinson is saying from the evidence that's before me, when the site promoters have looked at it, there's room to accommodate sort of a green corridor through the site. Because one of the things we haven't talked about, I wasn't necessarily intending to go there, is new development has to provide for biodiversity net gain. So you've got to improve on what's already there, and that's in legislation as well as other policies of this plan. If I can move on then to heritage matters, this was addressed at my MIQ 568. Various representations on the plan have raised obviously the potential, well, there's a heritage harm from the loss of the Whitburn Lodge building. Obviously I've been to the area, I've seen the current condition that it's in. There are other interesting features on the site, I think, that kind of point back to the mining kind of heritage. But perhaps if I can bring, is it Mrs Routledge for the authority in terms of whether there's potential sort of local heritage harm from site GA5.
Thank you. The Whitburn Lodge is not a designated heritage asset, and it's not on the council's local list. It is accepted, it is of some local interest, and this was raised through a representation made at Regulation 19 stage. But I'd direct you to Local Plan Policy 45, which deals with non-designated heritage assets. This policy is consistent with paragraph 203 of the September 2023 version of the MPPF, and it allows for proportionate sort of decision making. So if an application comes forward, you might ask for a building recording or a desk-based assessment, and these are things that would be admitted into the Town and Weir Historic Environment Record, which is publicly accessible.
But I mean, sorry, Mr. Lavelle.
Yeah, you've been yourself so that those Bob Orley plaques, referring back to the mining heritage, you know, I think there's a consensus that those are going to be preserved in some way, shape or form, you know, spoke to the owners, etc. But there has been representations, fair enough, it's not a listed building, etc. But the building itself originally was a building, a very small building, called Hope House. It was one of the first homesteads actually built in Whitburn, one of 4 or 5, I believe. It harks back to 1744. Unfortunately, because of the fire damage, etc., since then, whether it's feasible to preserve any of it, you know, or to link it to the heritage is another matter. What I haven't seen is any sort of structural sort of survey to say whether it's not feasible at all to retain some parts of Hope House. Obviously, the developers as such just want to raise it to the ground because then they have more land to build upon. But there has been representation after representation, and as the forum would try to field them and try to deal with it in a common sense approach, you know, say, oh, look, it's firebombed, you know, it's really collapsed. But they say, again, approaches are made to the forum. We must retain it. We must retain it. It's one of the last homesteads that still survive in Whitburn, and it should. But again, without a sort of some sort of feasibility study, I can't respond to the you know, to the applicants' applications I receive.
Obviously, I'm mindful. I'm looking at it very much from a local plan allocation perspective. I mean, putting aside what's currently being dealt with through the appeal process, but say another proposal was put forward to the local planning authority, Mrs. Routledge. I mean, are the policies there that would require potentially a heritage kind of assessment if that was felt necessary? I appreciate, having looked at the building, I think the council describes it as significant damage that's occurred as a result of the fire, and potentially, I don't know how long the building's been empty prior to the fire.
Thank you. Yes, we would always consider where we know that there is some local heritage interest. We'd always include that in an assessment of a planning application, and based on the heritage significance, we would form a decision to sort of determine whether or not we need to undertake any further work, any recording, things like that would help inform the final decision.
Yes. So again, I mean, say if it is taken into consideration, Hope House, and it is written up somewhere, you know, that it has been considered, because up till now, because it's not a listed building, basically, it's not grade 1 or grade 2 or anything like that, it doesn't seem to have been afforded, shall we say, the interest that it's afforded by residents, shall we say.
Thank you. Well, I see the council's statement on this matter speaks to Hope House. Obviously, it's something the council is aware of. Okay, thank you for that on heritage matters. Finally, under 6.3, in terms of looking at these two sites, obviously they are next to one another, but separately allocated, presumably reflecting how they've come forward and presented within this strategic housing land availability assessment framework. Was there potentially a realistic option of a single allocation for the wider sites, or are there any particular concerns or matters about the sites coming forward separately rather than in tandem or in a coordinated way at this location?
Yeah, so the sites have always been put forward to us as separate sites, given they're in separate ownerships. We don't see any sort of particular reason why they would need to come forward together. There's no major infrastructure requirements for the site, so there's no need for them to kind of come together on that basis. But, you know, equally, there's no reason that they couldn't come forward together if that was a possibility.
Thank you. And then similarly to the site we were discussing yesterday in Bolden, this is a location where there is an existing neighbourhood plan, obviously, referred to policies there, and a design guide. The policy has the key considerations are to have regard to those two documents. The neighbourhood plan is obviously part of the development plan for the area. I don't think I've read anywhere that there's any kind of dissent or disagreement that should comprise part of the policy, and that's a sound approach. As I think, thinking about Mr. Lavelle, to where you started from, the start of this discussion. Obviously, you've got particular policies in the neighbourhood plan.
Yeah, again, we've worked extensively with the owners of the site, and in terms of the Whitburn design guide. You know, we're happy that we've moved forward together, and the stumbling block over that site, as we contend, is the sewage pollution at Whitburn.
Thank you. So finally, coming on to delivery of the site, again, similar discussion. So in here somewhere. So there are two sites that are before me. Site GA5, I appreciate people aren't here necessarily representing that site, because I don't think there were duly made Regulation 19 representations, but obviously it is slightly different in terms of that is a site, as we mentioned, is subject to a current planning proposal now at the appeal stage. In terms of the council's position on this site, without sort of prejudice to that separate appeal process, when does the council consider that that site for about approximately 30 dwellings would come forward?
So I know in the statement of common ground, the site promoters there had given a kind of rough indication of that they envisaged completion within 18 months. The SHLA's taken a bit more of a conservative approach, given the uncertainty over the appeal and the application process. So the SHLA trajectory currently has that site completing in 28-29. But obviously that's a process that's under review, and the trajectory and the SHLA are updated annually.
Thank you. And for the purpose of when we look at the overall trajectory for stage 2, would that be using the SHLA figure of 28-29?
So we envisage there'll be some more work done on the trajectory after obviously this stage. The SHLA's sort of due an update from 24-25 anyway. So yeah, we'll be looking at updating that.
Thank you. I appreciate that's sort of a more fluid site, given the sort of concurrent planning process. In relation to site GA6, Mr. Dickinson, your clients site, again similar to previous site we've discussed, anticipating first completions by 28-29 as well?
Yes, very much expecting to start on site and with completion starting from 28-29 into 29-30. As with the previous site, there's no kind of infrastructure or key constraints that would stop us progressing. We have proposed a policy compliance scheme as part of the feasibility approach. So there's no particular view that anything extracted should be done during the planning application process. Obviously, the key difference here is we're talking about a smaller site, hence why the delivery rate is smaller, because the people that if you took this housing allocation forward, you would be going to different types of developers to build out this site, probably more small, medium enterprise type developers who would have a more limited or a different approach to delivery than maybe a bigger volume house builder.
Thank you for that. And I understand obviously there are the respective kind of different positions on overall delivery in terms of when these sites come forward. I understand from the forum's position there needs to be a much longer lead in time in relation to the wastewater issue from the council's perspective for the purpose of allocating these sites now in this local plan. That's not something that's subject to phasing at this stage. They can be allocated. But I think yes. As it's probably yes for me to go back to look at what's in the Ofwat report in terms of the recommendations, and then I understand your point, Mr. Lavelle, that you then say there needs to be a further 10-year monitoring on top of that. Yeah. Okay, I've got nothing further I want to say on that other than...
No, I think you covered everything. Thank you very much for listening to me.
You're welcome. And I think in terms of wastewater, yeah, that's something for me to think and reflect on from everything I've heard over the last 2 weeks. Okay, there's nothing further in relation to the 2 sites at Whitburn. Thank you for those submissions. That brings to a conclusion all the particular matter 5 discussions. I do want to have a further, I'm calling it an administrative session with the council in this room. Hopefully it's going to be recorded. I want the programme officer in attendance as well, just to sort of, in very general broad terms, where we are now, and then just look very broadly at what the potential roadmap going forward could look like, and just have a reasonably kind of open discussion. I'm not anticipating a lot of detail, but just to kind of understand respective positions. There's obviously various, things that have come out of the stage 1 hearings in terms of actions for the council. It's probably helpful if I share with the authority where I am and my availability, so we just understand what broadly the programme could look like. I'm not going to hold anybody to specific dates, but it will just be helpful, I think, to myself and to Mrs. Feeney, if we can just have that that discussion. The time now, amazingly, is 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. We're back on track, so you can meet your obligations, Mr. Lavelle. Similarly, Mr. Dickinson, we're not going to keep you prisoner here till late afternoon. We'll break now. I think I'd like the lunchtime adjournment. There's a few things I need to reflect on. Would it be possible to be back in this room at 1:45? I think we'd probably need no more than 15 minutes, something of that magnitude, so it can be finished. Okay, so I'll be back in this room at 1:45 with the council and the programme officer. Thank you, everybody.